late fall, and it happens to be a year that is evenly divisible by 4. To our political, or to our American listeners, we are coming to the end of a very long, grueling election season.
Yeah, holy moly.
And it's a little frustrating for me because I'm a very political person. I minored in political science. And the atheist community of Austin, of course, is a 501c3, which means we absolutely do not ever endorse candidates. And we try actually to go above and beyond what is minimally required of us to stay on board with the law. As a essentially non-political organization. And so I have this big soapbox, but I try to avoid using it to specifically endorse any particular candidate, and I'm not going to, but I do want to say a few words about American politics in general today. And so first, I want to read specific IRS guidelines that talk about what a nonprofit may and may not do. Real short, don't worry.
Okay.
You can educate the public about political issues and encourage voters to vote, and I intend to. In fact, I would say that on the Atheist Experience, we educate the public about political issues all the time, because whether people think about it this way or not, atheism is, in many ways, a political issue, particularly in the United States, even more so in some of the more oppressive countries where the whole definition of politics is how they suppress contrary points of view. From a scientific standpoint, atheism can often be a very boring question. You know, the question is there evidence scientifically to point to an all-knowing creator of the universe? And the answer for us is a resounding no. But that's not the extent of how I think of atheism. I think of atheism as sort of a non-mainstream position to take. That runs contrary to a lot of mainstream opinion in many countries and a lot of mainstream opinion that is foisted on people. So I do think that atheism is inherently a position that people need to be educated about. Second rule for nonprofits is that you may engage in a limited amount of lobbying, which is defined as advocating for or against specific pieces of legislation. I don't have any specific legislation in mind. The third and very relevant one is that you may not engage in partisan political activity. You can do nothing that advocates for or against specific candidates for public office or their political parties, and this includes fundraising on behalf of candidates, which we certainly don't do, and donating meeting spaces, among other things.
But churches do that all the time.
Yeah, they do, and they're technically generally not allowed to either.
Yeah, right.
But a lot of people manage to turn a blind eye to that, which we're against. And it's difficult to say what atheists do or should generally hold as their own political points of view, because I know lots of people from all over the spectrum. I know a lot of fine people who agree with me and a lot of terrible people who don't. No, just kidding. I think people are entitled to their opinions, and I think atheists really span the spectrum when it comes to, for instance, economic issues. But I think, you know, I've talked to a lot of non-believers for years and years, and there are a general set of issues that I think atheists agree on more than not. One of them is that separation of church and state is very important.
Yea, verily.
So important that it's actually in the atheist community of Austin's mission statement. We believe that as the Treaty of Tripoli said, we are in the United States of America is in no sense founded on the Christian religion. It shouldn't be. That wall of separation of church and state that is codified in the First Amendment allows people freedom of religion as well as, for atheists, freedom from religion. we as atheists believe that lots of people have all kinds of wild and crazy beliefs about supernatural things that can't be demonstrated through evidence, but I also think that it's important that they be allowed to hold those beliefs unmolested as long as they're not leveraging them in obvious ways that hurt people. Another... Yes, private delusions are fine. Another thing, and I'm sorry about this microphone, which won't stop rustling. Here we go. Another thing that I think atheists can generally agree on is that they tend to have a respect for science and education and free inquiry. And I think the way that manifests is that we don't think that education should be contaminated by religion. We don't think that specific religious groups should be pushing an agenda that isn't well demonstrated through non-religious lines of investigation, which means creationism is not something to be discussed in school except as a sociological issue, as in creationism exists and there are demographics who believe it, and discuss it from that point of view, but not to present non-science as if it were science. And we also tend to think that the mainstream scientific opinion about the nature of the world is an important thing that politicians should at least take into account when promoting certain policies. Not everybody is just dealing with the manipulation of small green pieces of paper, and not all a lot of legislation actually touches on the way that we should behave given a known set of facts about the way our world works. And in politics, we ought to do more than just pay lip service to science. It ought to be taken seriously. And I also believe that both politicians and voters should do their very best to base their opinions on research and knowledge and evidence and real information about the world. And I realize that not everybody can do that perfectly. And people often think they know what they're talking about when they're not. But you owe it to yourself to actually go out there and find out about stuff that you don't know, and base your political positions partly on known facts to the best of your ability. And finally, I think that this is a little more controversial among some atheists, but I think that generally we recognize that a lot of social oppression takes place because of religion. Religion tends to be in the business of entrenching power and pushing down minority groups like gay people. A lot of religions are extremely patriarchal and say that men are given more rights by God than women. And we're against those things. Not all of us. I think most of the people, I think everyone on the Atheist Experience agrees that basically equality is an important issue on many dimensions. So,
and human rights, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So all I want to say is, without endorsing any specific candidate, I like to think that our audience of the atheist community of Austin, the people who watch the show live, the people who listen to us later on podcast or watch us on YouTube, you guys are really smart. There are some exceptions, but by and large, I think that our audience is more educated and informed than the average voter, and your political voice does matter in your particular state, and I hope that you will all go and research all the positions of the people you're voting for. You know, it's work, but read about the stuff that's going to be on the ballot in your state. And I really, really hope that everybody hearing the sound of my voice who is eligible to vote in the United States will do that on November 8th. And that's really all I want to say about that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Get out there and vote. Vote early, vote often. Something like
Well, yes. Legally, though.
that. Legally, right.
Don't commit voter fraud.